At 12:17 in the morning, my key stopped working in the front door of the house I had paid for with 38 years of my life. Not stuck, not jammed. Changed, the brass key I had carried since 1986 slid halfway into the lock and hit something solid. Like the door itself had decided it no longer knew me. For a moment, I just stood there on my own porch with a pharmacy bag in one hand and my cane in the other, listening to the cold March wind drag dead leaves across the driveway. The porch light above me flickered once. Inside my house, the living room lamp was on. I could see movement behind the curtains. Someone was in there. Someone had changed the locks while I was gone. I knocked once, no answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Shadow crossed the window. Then my daughter's voice came through the door, quiet and flat. "Dad, go away." I stared at the wood grain in front of my face. "Emily?" There was a pause. Then I heard my son-in-law, Brian, whisper something behind her. Emily spoke again. "You don't live here anymore." Those 6 words did something to my chest that I still cannot explain. I had survived a heart attack at 68. I had buried my wife at 71. I had sat alone at our kitchen table for 2 years listening to the refrigerator hum because silence had become the loudest thing in the house. But nothing had ever made me feel as old as hearing my only child tell me I did not live in my own home. I leaned closer to the door. "Emily, open this door." No. My hand tightened around the pharmacy bag. Inside were blood pressure pills, the kind my doctor told me not to miss. "Sweetheart, it's cold. It's midnight. This is my house." That was when the porch camera above me clicked. Not the soft click of recording, the sharper sound of someone speaking through the camera app. Brian's voice came out of the little black box mounted above the door. "Harold, if you don't leave, we're calling the sheriff." He called me Harold, not Dad, not Mr. Whitaker, Harold. That was the moment I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. I looked down at the welcome mat my wife Margaret had bought from a church craft fair 12 years earlier. It still said "Bless this home" in faded blue letters. My daughter had locked me out while I was buying medicine, and my dead wife's welcome mat was under my feet like a cruel joke. I should have called the police right then. But old men do strange things when betrayal hits them in the face. We don't always shout. We don't always cry. Sometimes we just stand very still, because if we move too quickly, something inside us might break loose and never come back. I knocked one last time. "Emily, look at me through the window." The curtain moved half an inch. I saw one eye, my daughter's eye, the same blue eye I used to wipe tears from when she was 8 years old and afraid of thunderstorms. "Please," I said, "open the door." She did not. Instead, she said something I will never forget. "You should have signed when we asked nicely." That was when I realized this was not about locks. It was about papers. And I had spent 41 years of my life reading papers. People thought no one else understood. Before I retired, I worked as a county property title examiner. Most people don't know what that means. It sounds boring. It sounds like file cabinets, courthouse basements, coffee stains, and old deeds written in language nobody uses anymore. And yes, it was all of those things. But it also taught me how people steal, not with guns most of the time, not with masks. They steal with signatures. They steal with notary stamps. They steal with quiet lies, whispered in offices where elderly people are too tired to argue. They steal houses from widows, land from brothers, inheritance from grandchildren. And sometimes, if the thief is patient enough, they steal a father's home while he is standing on the porch holding his medicine. I took one slow breath. Then I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff myself. Emily must have seen me do it through the curtain, because the deadbolt clicked from inside, not open, just another lock turning, like she wanted me to hear it. The dispatcher asked for my name and location. "My name is Harold Whitaker," I said. "I'm at 1842 Red Maple Lane. My daughter has changed the locks on my home and is refusing to let me inside." There was a pause. "Sir, are you safe?" I looked at the upstairs window. A light came on in my bedroom. "I am standing on my porch," I said. "But I don't believe I am safe." While I waited for the sheriff, I walked to the end of the driveway and sat on the low stone wall Margaret and I built with our own hands in the summer of 1994. The stones were uneven because neither one of us knew what we were doing. Margaret had laughed so hard that day because I kept measuring each rock like I was drafting a military bridge. She said, "Harold, it's a garden wall, not a federal courthouse." She was always the warmth in the room. I was the paperwork. That was our marriage. I handled the documents, the bills, the plans, the repairs. Margaret handled the people. She remembered birthdays, baked pies for sick neighbors, and could forgive a person before I had even finished being angry. When she died, the house did not feel empty at first. It felt interrupted. Her teacup was still in the cabinet. Her yellow raincoat still hung by the back door. Her handwriting was still on freezer bags labeled "Chicken Soup, January." For a long time, I could not throw anything away because everything still looked like she might come home and ask where I moved it. Emily knew that. My daughter knew every soft place in me. That is what made what happened next so dangerous. The sheriff's cruiser pulled in at 12:41 a.m. The headlights swept across the front of the house, catching the curtains as they moved again. Emily and Brian were watching. A deputy stepped out first. Tall, young, maybe 35, with a square jaw and tired eyes. Behind him came Sheriff Daniel Harlan himself. I knew Dan Harlan from back when he was a deputy, and I was still working at the courthouse. He had less gray in his beard then. We were not friends exactly, but in small counties, everyone who handles records eventually knows everyone who handles warrants. He recognized me before I stood. "Mr. Whitaker, Sheriff." He looked at the pharmacy bag in my hand, then at the house. "What's going on?" My daughter changed the locks while I was out. His face tightened, not with surprise, but with the kind of disappointment men in law enforcement get when they already suspect the story is going to get uglier. "Do you have ID?" I handed him my driver's license. He looked at it, then at the house number on the mailbox. "Is this your legal residence?" "For 38 years. Any court order? Eviction? Protective order?" "Not that I know of." The young deputy walked to the door and knocked. Emily opened it 2 inches with the chain still on. The smell of my own house came out into the night. Coffee, lavender cleaner, and Brian's expensive cologne. "Mom," the deputy said, "we need to speak with you." Emily's voice changed instantly, softer, shaking. "A performance." "Officer, my father is confused. He's been having episodes. We were advised not to let him back in tonight." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was rehearsed. Sheriff Harlan looked at me. "Episodes?" I said nothing. Sometimes the first lie is more useful if you let it breathe. Emily unhooked the chain and opened the door wider. She was wearing my wife's gray cardigan. That hit me harder than the lock. Margaret's cardigan, the one she wore on cold mornings. Emily had put it on like costume evidence. Like grief could be borrowed and used as protection. Brian appeared behind her in a navy sweater, phone already in hand, recording. Of course he was recording. People who lie often believe the camera makes them honest. Brian said, "Sheriff, we have documentation." Harold transferred care decisions to Emily. "He's not supposed to be alone." Sheriff Harlan held out a hand. "Let me see the documentation." Emily gave him a folder. I recognized the folder immediately. It was mine, dark green, frayed at the corner, from the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. The drawer where I kept tax records, insurance papers, and copies of the trust Margaret and I created before she died. My daughter had been in my files. The sheriff opened the folder under the porch light. He read the first page. Then the second. His expression did not change, but I saw his thumb stop moving. That tiny pause told me everything. After a lifetime with documents, you learn to watch the reader. Brian kept talking. He agreed this arrangement was best. "He's been forgetting things, leaving burners on, accusing us of stealing. We're just trying to protect him." Sheriff Harlan looked up. "Mr. Whitaker, did you sign a document giving your daughter possession of this property?" "No," Emily snapped. "Dad, you don't remember." I looked at her. "Emily, I remember teaching you how to ride a bicycle on this street. I remember sitting up with you when you had pneumonia in 4th grade. I remember pawning my watch to help pay for your first semester at college." Her mouth tightened. "And I remember every document I have signed since 1978. The young deputy looked down to hide whatever crossed his face. Sheriff Harlan turned another page, then he read aloud. "This document appears to be a healthcare power of attorney. It does not convey real property." Brian's smile faded. The sheriff continued. "And this copy is unsigned by the principal on page 4. Emily reached for the folder. "It's a copy. The full one is inside." Sheriff Harlan did not give it back. "Do you have a deed?" Brian said. "We're in the process of filing." That sentence told me more than he meant to reveal. In the process, not filed, not legal, not complete. The sheriff looked toward the cruiser. "Deputy Miller, run the property record." The deputy returned to the car. Emily crossed her arms. Brian kept recording, but his hand had started to shake. Nobody spoke for almost a minute. The wind lifted the corner of Margaret's welcome mat. I watched my daughter standing in my doorway wearing my wife's cardigan, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. Pain was still there, shock was still there. But underneath it, something older and colder had woken up. I had spent my entire professional life dealing with people who thought paper could make lies permanent. They were almost always wrong. Deputy Miller came back with his tablet. He handed it to Sheriff Harlan. The sheriff looked at the screen, then he looked at Emily, then he looked at me, and in the quietest voice of the night, he read my name. Current owner of record, Harold James Whitaker. Emily's face changed, not much, just enough. The fear appeared before she could cover it. Sheriff Harlan turned the tablet toward Brian. Not Emily Whitaker. Not Brian Cole. Harold James Whitaker. Brian lowered his phone. The sheriff's voice hardened. Mom, unless you have a court order stating otherwise, you cannot lock the lawful owner out of his residence. Emily whispered, he's not well. Sheriff Harlan said, then you should have called Adult Protective Services. Not changed his locks at midnight. I watched my daughter's eyes fill with tears. But they were not tears of guilt. They were tears of being caught too early. That is a different kind of crying. The sheriff told her to open the door fully. She did. And when I stepped across my own threshold, I saw the first real sign that this was bigger than a changed lock. My living room had been rearranged, not cleaned, not tidied, searched. The drawers of the side table were slightly open. The photo albums from the bottom shelf were stacked on the floor. The small walnut box where Margaret kept old Christmas cards was missing from the mantel, and my filing cabinet in the hallway office stood open. Every drawer. Open. The sheriff saw me looking. Mr. Whitaker? I pointed with my cane. They went through my files. Emily immediately said, I was organizing. You hate paperwork, I said. She flinched. Brian stepped forward. This is family business. You don't need to. Sheriff Harlan cut him off. Sir, I strongly suggest you stop talking. There are moments when a room changes temperature. That was one of them. Brian stepped back. The young deputy checked the back door. I walked slowly into the office. My desk lamp was on. The banker's lamp Margaret bought me for my retirement had been knocked crooked. Papers were scattered across the surface, but the thing that made my stomach drop was the empty space beside the printer. My red binder was gone. The red binder contained copies of everything that mattered: the house deed, the trust agreement, Margaret's life insurance documents, my will, my medical directives, and one sealed envelope my wife had written 6 months before she died. The envelope was labeled in Margaret's handwriting. For Harold, if the house ever stops feeling safe. I had never opened it. I suppose part of me did not want to admit she had been afraid of something before she died. Now the envelope was gone. I turned around. Where is the red binder? Emily stared at me. What binder? I looked at Brian. His eyes shifted toward the stairs, only for half a second. But half a second is enough when a man is lying. I started toward the staircase. Emily stepped in front of me. Dad, you need to calm down. That phrase, you need to calm down. People use it when they want witnesses to see your reaction instead of their behavior. I stopped. I smiled gently. That scared her more than anger would have. Emily, I said, you changed my locks, stole my documents, and told a sheriff I was incompetent. If I were any calmer, I'd be dead. Deputy Miller coughed once. Sheriff Harlan said, Mr. Whitaker, do you want them removed from the residence tonight? Emily's head snapped toward me. For 1 second, she looked 8 years old again. The same face she made when she broke Margaret's blue vase and waited for punishment. But I was not her father in that moment. I was the lawful owner of a home she had tried to take. I said, yes. Emily whispered, Dad. That one word almost did it. Almost. If you have ever had a child turn against you, you understand the terrible weakness in that word. That it carries every bedtime story, every fever, every school play, every sacrifice. A grown child can use it like a knife because they know exactly where to place it. But then I looked at Margaret's cardigan hanging from my daughter's shoulders, and I remembered what she had said through the door. You should have signed when we asked nicely. I looked at Sheriff Harlan. I want them out. Brian exploded. You ungrateful old bastard. The deputy stepped between us. Emily grabbed Brian's arm. Stop. But it was too late. The mask had slipped. Sheriff Harlan ordered them to gather only personal belongings and leave. Emily cried the whole time, but she still tried to take the green folder. The sheriff stopped her at the door. That stays. It's mine, she said. No, I said. It isn't. She looked at me then, really looked. And for the first time that night, I saw hatred in my daughter's face. Not disappointment, not fear. Hatred. It was small and sharp and old. I wondered how long it had been living there. After they drove away in Brian's black SUV, the house felt violated. That is the only word. Violated, not robbed, not messy. Violated, there are crimes that take things. And then there are crimes that reach backward and touch every memory in a room. The sheriff stood with me in the hallway. Harold, he said quietly, this may not be over. I know. You need to check your accounts, your mail, any recent filings. If they were in your records, there may be more. I know. He looked at me carefully. Do you have somewhere else to stay tonight? I almost said no. Pride is a foolish thing at 73. But then I looked at the new deadbolt on my front door. My daughter had installed it so I could not enter. Now I was inside, and I still did not feel safe. Yes, I lied. I'll manage. Sheriff Harlan gave me his card anyway. Call me if they come back. After he left, I locked the door. Then I stood in the living room and listened. A house has sounds you know, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick in the heating vent, the old floorboard near the hall closet that complains when stepped on. But that night, every sound felt unfamiliar because someone else's intentions had been inside my walls. I went upstairs. My bedroom drawers had been opened. Margaret's jewelry box was on the bed. Not completely. Her costume pearls were still there. The little silver pin shaped like a dove was still there. But her wedding ring was gone. I sat on the edge of the bed. For a while, I could not breathe properly. Margaret had worn that ring for 46 years. I had taken it off her finger myself at the funeral home because the director said sometimes jewelry should be removed before burial if the family wants to keep it. I remember holding her cold hand and apologizing for outliving her, apologizing for every night I worked late, apologizing for not knowing how to cook her chicken soup right. I put her ring in the jewelry box and had not touched it since. Emily knew that she had taken it anyway. That was when grief turned into evidence, not anger. Evidence. I went downstairs, made coffee I did not drink, and pulled an old legal pad from the kitchen drawer. At 2:04 a.m., I wrote at the top, "Things missing, red binder, Margaret's wedding ring, walnut card box, original trust copy, mail from bank, tax folder 2024. Then I wrote, "What did they want me to sign?" That question kept me awake until sunrise. At 7:16 the next morning, the bank called. A young woman named Alicia from First County Credit Union asked if I had authorized a home equity line of credit application for $190,000. I closed my eyes. There it was, money. It is almost always money. "No," I said. There was a pause. "Mr. Whitaker, the application was submitted online using your personal information. It lists Emily Cole as authorized financial representative. My daughter." "Yes, sir." "When was it submitted?" "Yesterday at 11:08 p.m., while I was at the pharmacy, while my locks were being changed, while Brian was probably standing in my office scanning documents with my printer." Alicia lowered her voice. "Sir, there's something else. We attempted to call your listed number for verification, but the number was changed on the profile 2 days ago." "To what?" She read the last 4 digits, Brian's number. I thanked her, froze the application, requested a fraud packet, and hung up. Then I sat there staring at the kitchen wall where Margaret had hung a framed cross-stitch that said, "A home is made of love and bread." She used to joke that ours had more bread than love on the weeks I worked overtime. I whispered, "I'm sorry, Maggie." And then I began. People think old men are slow. Sometimes we are. Our knees slow down, our hands tremble. We forget why we walked into rooms. But don't mistake a slower body for a weaker mind. The mind of an old man can be a very dangerous place, especially when it has spent decades learning patience. I did not call Emily. I did not call Brian. I did not send angry messages. I did not beg. Begging teaches wolves where the door is. Instead, I made a list: county recorder, bank fraud department locksmith, pharmacy receipt, sheriff report, doctor cognitive evaluation, insurance agent, tax office neighbor cameras, Margaret's safe deposit box. That last one made my hand stop. Save deposit box. I had not opened it since Margaret died. It was at First County, under both our names. She used to keep her mother's birth certificate there, along with some old savings bonds and a photograph of our first house. But Margaret was not a careless woman. If she had written an envelope saying the house ever stopped feeling safe, maybe she had left something else. Maybe she had seen Emily changing before I did. That thought hurt more than I expected, because if Margaret had known, and I had not, then my grief had made me blind. At 9:30 a.m., I drove to the county recorder's office. The courthouse smelled the same as it always had: old paper, floor wax, and people pretending not to be nervous. My replacement, a woman named Clara Ruiz, looked up from her desk and froze when she saw me. "Harold Whitaker," she said. "I thought retirement swallowed you whole." "Not yet." She smiled, then saw my face. "What happened?" "I need to search filings on my property." Her smile disappeared. She brought me to the public terminal herself. The first search showed what Sheriff Harlan had read. Owner of record, Harold James Whitaker. No transfers, no filed deed, no lien, no mortgage. Then Clara clicked pending electronic submissions. One document, rejected, submitted the previous night at 11:32 p.m. Document type: quitclaim deed, grantor. Harold James Whitaker, grantee. Emily Whitaker Cole, consideration. $1 in love. I stared at the screen. $1 in love. There are phrases in legal documents that should make honest people sick. That is one of them. Clara opened the rejection note. Signature mismatch. Notary commission expired. Missing legal description attachment. I felt my jaw tighten. "Can you print it?" She hesitated. "Harold, this may be part of a fraud investigation." "Then print 2. One for me, one for the sheriff." She did. The signature at the bottom was supposed to be mine. It was not. It looked like someone had practiced from old Christmas cards and bank forms, copying the big H and the long tail on the R, but they made one mistake. A small one. After my wrist surgery in 2015, I stopped connecting the W in Whitaker. The forged signature connected it. Most people would never notice. I noticed before I finished breathing, the notary stamp belonged to a woman named Patrice Bell. I did not recognize the name. But the witness line did something strange to me. Witness, Margaret E. Whitaker, my dead wife. They had used my dead wife as a witness on a forged deed. For a moment, the courthouse around me blurred, not because I was confused, because rage has its own weather. Clara saw it. Harold, I pointed to the witness line. She died 2 years ago. Clara covered her mouth. I folded the paper carefully, very carefully, the way a man folds a flag. Then I said, now it's criminal. By noon, I had copies of the rejected deed, the bank fraud alert, and the sheriff's incident number. I drove from the courthouse to First County Credit Union and opened the safe deposit box. The clerk brought it to a small private room. The box was heavier than I remembered. Inside were Margaret's old documents, just as expected, birth certificates, savings bonds, a photo of us standing in front of our first apartment, both of us too young to know what life would cost. And beneath them, wrapped in a yellow cloth, was a sealed envelope. My name was written across it, Harold. Not if the house stops feeling safe. Just Harold. I sat down before I opened it. Margaret's handwriting had always leaned slightly to the right, as if even her words were moving toward someone. The letter began, my love, if you are reading this alone, then either I am gone or I was too afraid to say this while I was still here. I stopped. My throat closed. There are some voices death does not erase. You hear them in handwriting, in recipes, in the way a drawer was organized. I kept reading. I need you to listen to me, not as your wife who worries too much, but as the woman who has watched our daughter change in ways you keep explaining away. Emily has been asking questions about the house. Not normal questions. She asked where the original deed is. She asked what happens if you can't manage things. She asked whether a power of attorney can be used after someone becomes confused. Brian was with her when she asked. I know you love her. I love her too. But love is not the same as trust. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Love is not the same as trust. Margaret had always been kinder than me. If she had reached that conclusion, something terrible must have happened before I knew. The letter continued. I have placed copies of the trust, deed, insurance papers, and my statement in this box. I also changed the trust language with Attorney Bellamy. The house cannot be sold, borrowed against, or transferred without your in-person authorization and an independent physician's capacity letter. If anyone claims you signed something at home, question it. If Emily says you agreed, question it. If Brian speaks for her, question him first, and Harold. If our child tries to take your home, do not protect her from the truth. Protect yourself. I covered my face with my hand. In that little bank room, under fluorescent lights, I cried for the first time since the funeral. Not loudly. Old men often cry like they are apologizing for it. But I cried because my wife had reached across death and warned me about my own daughter, and she had been right. Under the letter was a copy of the amended trust. I read it twice, then a third time. Margaret had done more than warn me. She had built a wall. The Harold and Margaret Whitaker Family Trust placed the home under my control until my death, but added special protections. Any transfer required my physical appearance before Attorney Samuel Bellamy or his successor, a physician's capacity confirmation within 7 days, and notification to Sheriff Daniel Harlan's office if attempted under dispute. I laughed once when I read that, a painful, broken laugh. Margaret had always liked Sheriff Harlan. She said he had honest eyes. But the last page was what changed everything. A signed statement from Margaret, notarized properly, describing a conversation she overheard between Emily and Brian 8 months before she died. Brian had said, once he's alone, it won't be hard. He trusts you. Emily had replied, I know, but Mom watches everything. Mom watches everything. That line sat in my chest like a stone, because Margaret had watched. She had watched all the way to the end, and I had missed it. I left the bank with copies in a new folder pressed against my ribs like armor. At 2:10 p.m., Emily called for the first time. I let it ring. She called again, then Brian, then Emily again. Then a text appeared. Dad, we need to talk before this gets worse. I wrote back one sentence. It already did. No answer. 15 minutes later, a different number called. The caller ID said Green Meadows Senior Living. A woman said, Mr. Whitaker, this is Denise from Green Meadows. We had you scheduled for intake tomorrow morning, but we still need your medication list and financial guarantor forms. For a few seconds, I could not speak. Intake? Yes, sir. Your daughter, Emily, arranged a transition stay. She said you were aware. Transition stay. That is what they call it when someone moves an old man out of his life with clean words. I asked Denise to send me everything they had on file. She seemed nervous. Sir, are you saying you did not consent? I am saying if my daughter brings me there tomorrow, you should call the sheriff. There was silence. Then she said, I'm going to escalate this to our administrator. Good. When I hung up, I added Green Meadows to the legal pad. Then I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the chair across from me, Margaret's chair. If you've ever ignored a small, uneasy feeling because it came from someone you love, you know how foolish I felt sitting there. I would later tell people, because the signs had been there. Emily had started coming by more after Margaret died. At first, I thought it was kindness. She brought casseroles I didn't ask for. She offered to sort bills. She said I shouldn't climb ladders anymore, shouldn't drive at night, shouldn't worry about taxes, shouldn't deal with insurance calls. Little by little, concern became control. Dad, I'll hold on to your spare key. Dad, why do you need online banking? Dad, Brian says you should simplify things. Dad, maybe you should sign this just in case. Just in case, the most dangerous phrase in families. People can hide almost anything inside it. I remembered the first time she asked me to sign a power of attorney. It was 3 months after the funeral. We were sitting at the kitchen table. Brian had placed the document in front of me like a waiter presenting a menu. It's standard, he said, just so Emily can help if something happens. I read the first page and said, this gives broad financial authority. Brian smiled, only if needed. I slid it back. If it's only if needed, then it can wait until it's needed. Emily had gone quiet. That night she left without hugging me. I told myself grief makes people sensitive. I told myself Brian was pushy, but Emily meant well. I told myself many things because the alternative was unbearable. Now the alternative stood in front of me with a new deadbolt, by 4 p.m. I had spoken to attorney Samuel Bellamy. He was 81, half-retired, and still sharper than anyone in the county courthouse. When I told him what happened, he did not sound surprised. That hurt too. Harold, he said. Margaret asked me to make those changes because she feared undue influence. Why didn't she tell me? She said you would protect Emily from consequences. I looked out the kitchen window. The garden wall Margaret and I built sat crooked in the afternoon light. She was right, I said. Attorney Bellamy sighed. She usually was. He told me to come in the next morning. Bring everything. Do not speak to Emily alone. Do not allow Brian inside. Install temporary cameras. Freeze credit. File a police report for the forged deed and attempted financial fraud. Then he said something that stayed with me. Harold, they tried the door first because they thought you were still grieving too hard to check the foundation. That was exactly right. They thought I was soft. They confused sadness with weakness. That evening, I changed my own locks, legally, with a locksmith named Marv who had worked on half the doors in town. When he arrived, he looked uncomfortable. Mr. Whitaker, he said, I need to tell you something. My hand tightened around my cane. What? I was the one who changed the front lock last night. The air between us went still. He swallowed. Your son-in-law called, said you'd lost your keys and authorized it. Your daughter was here. She had paperwork. What paperwork? Power of attorney, I think. I didn't read close enough. His face reddened. I should have. I stared at him. Marv was not a bad man. That almost made it worse. Evil often succeeds because decent people are in a hurry. Did they pay by card? Yes. Do you have the invoice? Email it to me. He nodded quickly. There's something else. Of course there was. He reached into his jacket and handed me a folded piece of paper. I found this stuck behind the old deadbolt when I removed it just now. Maybe it was already there. Maybe it fell from somewhere. The paper was old, yellowed at the fold. My name was written on it in Margaret's handwriting. Harold, if this lock is changed without you. Look behind the hall clock. I had to sit down. Marv looked terrified. Sir? I waved him away gently. Finish the locks. When he left, I walked to the hallway clock. It was a tall oak grandfather clock, inherited from Margaret's father. It had not worked in years, but she refused to get rid of it because she said every house needs one thing that remembers time differently. I moved it carefully. Behind it, taped to the wall, was a small key. Not a house key, a desk key. I knew which desk. Margaret's sewing desk in the upstairs guest room. My hands shook as I unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside was the red binder, not the one Emily had taken. A duplicate. Margaret had made a duplicate red binder and hidden it years ago. On top of it was another note. Harold, if you found this, I am sorry. But I know you. You keep one copy where honest people would keep it. So I kept one copy where frightened people would never think to look. Forgive me for preparing for something I prayed would never happen, M. I sat on the guest room floor with that binder in my lap and whispered, You clever woman. And for the first time since the locks changed, I smiled. Not because I was happy. Because I was not alone in this fight. Margaret had left me a map. The duplicate binder contained everything Emily thought she had stolen. But it also contained things I had never seen: printed emails, bank notes, a written timeline Margaret had kept, dates when Emily asked about my memory, dates when Brian asked about refinancing. A note from our neighbor Mrs. Alvarez saying she saw Brian photographing our mailbox, and a printed screenshot of an online search from Emily's tablet, which Margaret must have found. Can power of attorney sell house if parent has dementia? My daughter had not snapped. She had studied. That is the moment the story turned inside me. Until then, I was a father trying to understand why his child had betrayed him. After that, I became a witness. And witnesses do not need to understand motive before they preserve evidence. That night, I slept in my recliner with a baseball bat on the floor beside me and my phone on my chest. At 3:03 a.m., the driveway camera I had installed that afternoon sent an alert. A vehicle had stopped near the mailbox, black SUV. Brian's. I did not move. On the camera feed, Brian stepped out wearing a hoodie. He opened my mailbox with a key, my mailbox key. He took out the mail, flipped through it under his phone light, and froze, because taped inside the mailbox door was a note I had placed there 2 hours earlier. Brian's smile. "You're on camera." He looked straight at the camera hidden in the porch planter. Then he ran. I sent the clip to Sheriff Harlan. He replied at 3:21 a.m. "Got it," 2 words, but they felt like a door closing behind Brian. The next morning, Attorney Bellamy's office smelled like leather chairs and old tobacco, though I had never once seen him smoke. He sat behind his desk, reading Margaret's letter. When he finished, he removed his glasses. "I told her to tell you." "I know. She said you would confront Emily emotionally and give her a chance to explain." "She knew me. She knew all of us." I handed him the forged deed. He looked at Margaret's name on the witness line. For the first time in all the years I knew him, Samuel Bellamy looked angry, quietly angry, the kind of anger that costs people money. "They used a deceased witness," he said. "Yes, and an expired notary stamp. Yes, and attempted a home equity line. Yes, and senior living intake without consent. Yes." He stacked the papers with perfect precision. "Then we are not having a family disagreement. No, we are documenting a conspiracy." That word landed heavily. Conspiracy. It sounded dramatic. Too dramatic. But sometimes legal language is the only language strong enough for family betrayal. Bellamy's assistant, Nora, came in with coffee and a box of tissues she pretended were for the desk. She had known Margaret too. Everyone had known Margaret. That became important later, because my daughter had underestimated how many people loved the woman whose name she forged. Bellamy laid out the plan. First, emergency injunction preventing Emily and Brian from entering the property or representing authority over me. Second, fraud report with sheriff's office. Third, notification to bank, credit agencies, county recorder, Green Meadows, my doctor, insurance agent. Fourth, a capacity evaluation. Fifth, civil filing preserving evidence and seeking damages. "Damages?" I asked. He looked at me over his glasses. "Harold, she stole your wife's wedding ring." My mouth went dry. "I want that back." "I know," he said, "but you may need to accept that getting it back is not the same as getting your daughter back." I looked away. There it was. The wound under all the paperwork, because part of me still wanted Emily to knock on the door, sobbing, saying Brian made her do it, saying she was scared, saying she made one mistake and needed her father. But the evidence did not show one mistake. It showed a staircase. And she had walked down every step. That afternoon, I went to see Dr. Patel, not because I doubted my mind, because I knew Emily's next move. When people fail to steal from an old person legally, they often try to steal their credibility. Dr. Patel had treated me for 12 years. He performed a cognitive screening, reviewed my medications, checked my blood pressure, and asked me to draw a clock. I drew it perfectly. Then I added the time. 12:17. He asked why. That's when my daughter changed my locks. His pen stopped moving. I told him everything. By the end, he wrote a letter stating that I was alert, oriented, capable of independent decision-making, and showed no clinical evidence of cognitive impairment. Then he leaned back. "Harold, has anyone been managing your medication?" "Emily filled my pill organizer last week." He frowned. "Bring it." I had. He opened the plastic organizer and examined the pills. Then he took out one small white tablet. "This is not yours." My skin went cold. "What is it?" He looked closer. "Looks like a low-dose sedative. I need the imprint to confirm." The room grew very quiet. If you are watching this and you have elderly parents, listen carefully. Control does not always begin with shouting. Sometimes it begins with someone offering to organize the pills. Dr. Patel placed the tablet in a small bag. "I'm documenting this," he said. I nodded. But inside, something in me broke again. Because stealing a house is greed. Forging a name is greed. But slipping a sedative into your father's medication is something darker. That is not theft, that is preparation. When I got home, there were flowers on the porch, white lilies, Margaret's funeral flowers. A card was tucked inside, Dad. Please stop this before you destroy the family. Love. Emily stared at the word love. Then I looked at the driveway camera and saw she had placed them there herself. No Brian, just Emily. She had stood on my porch in daylight, left funeral flowers, and asked me not to destroy the family after she tried to erase me from it. I carried the flowers to the garbage bin. Then I stopped evidence. I photographed them first. Then the card, then the security footage. Then I threw them away. That evening, my grandson Noah called. He was 14. Emily's son, the only grandchild I had. His voice was low. Grandpa? Noah? Mom said I'm not supposed to call you. I closed my eyes. Are you safe? I think so. Where are you? In my room. He was whispering. Children should not have to whisper because adults are greedy. He said, Mom's crying. Brian's mad. He punched the garage wall. Did he hurt you? No. If he does, you call 911. Then you call me. Okay. He went quiet. Then he said, Grandpa, did you really forget who I was? My hand tightened around the phone. What? Mom said you forgot me last week. That's why you couldn't come to my game. I stood up slowly. No, I didn't know you had a game. She said she told you. My daughter had not only hidden my mail, she had hidden my grandson from me. Noah, I said carefully, I have never forgotten you. Not once, not for 1 second. He sniffed. Okay, there was something else in his voice. What is it? He hesitated. Then he whispered. I heard Brian say after Friday you wouldn't be a problem anymore. The room went still. What exactly did he say? He said the old man won't be a problem after Friday. Mom told him not to say it in the house. I looked at the calendar. Friday was 2 days away. What else? Noah's breath shook. He said they already had a buyer. There it was, the timeline. Change locks Tuesday night. Senior living intake Wednesday or Thursday. Fraud deed corrected and resubmitted, loan or sale by Friday. And me? Confused, sedated. Discredited, lock it away, I said. No, listen to me. Do not confront them. Do not ask questions. Delete this call from your recent list if you know how. I do. If anything feels wrong, go to Mrs. Alvarez next door. You remember her? The lady with the orange cat? Yes. She'll call me. Grandpa? Yes, are you mad at Mom? I looked at Margaret's photo on the mantle. I'm sad at Mom. That was the truest thing I could say. After Noah hung up, I called Sheriff Harlan again. This time, I did not speak like a father. I spoke like a man reporting a threat. By Thursday morning, the sheriff's office had opened a formal investigation. Brian was brought in for questioning after the mailbox footage. Emily refused to come in without an attorney. That told me she had finally realized this was no longer a family argument. She could cry her way through, but she still had one move left. At 11:06 a.m., 2 deputies came to my door, not Harlan, younger men, uncomfortable. One said, Mr. Whitaker, we received a welfare concern. From my daughter? He did not answer, which meant yes. She says you have firearms in the house and threatens self-harm. I stared at him. There are lies that disgust you. And then there are lies designed to make the state take control of your body. That was one. I have an old hunting rifle locked in the basement safe, I said. Hasn't been fired in 15 years. I have threatened no one, including myself. May we come in? I could have refused, but I had been expecting this. I invited them in. On the kitchen table, I had arranged copies of my doctor's letter, the sheriff report, the forged deed, the bank fraud alert, the sedative note, and the video still of Brian at the mailbox. The deputy looked at the documents, then he looked at me. You were ready for us. My daughter is predictable when frightened. They checked the safe. The rifle was locked. Ammunition separate. No issue. Before they left, one deputy said quietly, my grandmother went through something like this. I looked at him. Did anyone believe her? His jaw tightened. Not soon enough. That sentence followed me the rest of the day. Not soon enough. How many old people lose everything because the first lie sounds more convenient than the truth? At 4:40 p.m., Attorney Bellamy called. Emergency hearing tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock, Friday. Yes. The day Brian said I wouldn't be a problem anymore. Bellamy was silent for a moment. Then let's become a problem at 9. That night, I did not sleep. I walked through the house slowly, touching things like I was saying goodbye even though I had no intention of leaving. The doorway where Emily's height marks were still faintly visible under layers of paint, the kitchen counter where Margaret rolled pie crust, the basement step where I once slipped and Emily laughed so hard she snorted, the guest room where Noah built blanket forts when he was little. A house is not wood and roofing. A house is the physical memory of a life. That is why stealing one from an old person is not just financial abuse. It is history theft. At 6 a.m., I put on my Navy suit, the same one I wore to Margaret's funeral. Then I opened the jewelry box again. Her ring was still gone. I touched the empty velvet slot. "I'll try to get it back," I whispered. At the courthouse, Emily arrived wearing black, not morning black, courtroom black. Brian wore a gray suit too tight at the shoulders. His right hand was bandaged from punching the garage wall. Emily's attorney was a young man with polished shoes and the restless confidence of someone who had not yet been humiliated by facts. Noah was not there, thank God. Sheriff Harlan sat in the back row. Clara from the recorder's office sat behind him. Marv the locksmith sat near the aisle, twisting his cap in both hands. Alicia from the bank had provided a sworn statement. Dr. Patel's letter was in Bellamy's folder. Margaret's letter was in mine. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Judge Evelyn Ross had presided over property disputes for 20 years. She was small, silver-haired, and had the kind of eyes that made nonsense feel ashamed of itself. Emily's attorney spoke first. He painted a picture: an aging widower, a concerned daughter, a misunderstanding, a family trying to protect a vulnerable man, temporary lock change, medication assistance, a senior living consultation. He did not mention forged deeds. People rarely mention the worst facts when they are hoping the judge will not ask. Then Bellamy stood. He did not raise his voice. He never did. "Your Honor," he said, "this is not a misunderstanding. This is an attempted illegal dispossession of an elderly homeowner by means of forged property documents, financial impersonation, medication interference, and false claims of incapacity." The young attorney objected. Judge Ross said, "Sit down. I want to hear where this is going." Bellamy began with the title record. He projected it on the screen. Current owner, Harold James Whitaker. There was my name again, not just spoken on a porch, now displayed in a courtroom. Then he showed the rejected quitclaim deed. Grantor, Harold James Whitaker. Grantee, Emily Whitaker Cole. Witness, Margaret E. Whitaker. Judge Ross leaned forward. "Margaret Whitaker?" Bellamy said. "Deceased, Your Honor, 2 years prior." The courtroom went silent. Emily looked down. Brian stared at the table. The judge's face changed by 1 degree. 1 degree was enough, Bellamy continued. He showed the expired notary stamp, the signature mismatch, the bank application, the changed phone number, the Green Meadows intake, the locksmith invoice, the mailbox video, the doctor's cognitive letter, the unidentified sedative. Each document was a nail, not dramatic by itself, but together they built a coffin around the lie. Then Bellamy called Sheriff Harlan. The sheriff described the night of the lockout. He described Emily claiming I was confused, Brian recording. The documents provided, the property search. Then Bellamy asked, "Sheriff, when you checked the owner of record, whose name appeared?" Sheriff Harlan turned slightly toward the judge. "Harold James Whitaker." "My daughter closed her eyes," Bellamy asked. "Did Miss Cole have legal authority to exclude Mr. Whitaker from the home?" "No." "Did she present a deed?" "No." "Did the paperwork she presented convey ownership?" "No." "Based on your experience, did the scene appear to be a simple family misunderstanding?" Sheriff Harlan looked at Emily, then at Brian. "No." That one word landed harder than a shout. Then came Marv, the locksmith. He admitted changing the lock based on Emily and Brian's representation. He apologized to the court. He provided the invoice and Brian's payment record. Then Clara testified about the rejected deed. Then Dr. Patel's letter was entered. Then came the moment I had dreaded. Margaret's letter. Bellamy asked me to read only 1 paragraph. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The courtroom blurred for a second. Then I read my wife's words aloud. "I know you love her. I love her too. But love is not the same as trust." Emily began to cry. This time I looked at her, really looked. And I saw something beyond fear. Shame, maybe it had been there all along, buried under entitlement, and panic, maybe not. When Bellamy asked if I wanted to speak, I stood. I did not look at the judge first. I looked at my daughter. "Emily," I said, "when your mother died, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me had already happened." She covered her mouth. I was wrong. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the old vents rattling. "You changed my locks at midnight. You took my wife's ring. You used her name after death. You told people my mind was failing. You tried to put me somewhere I did not choose. And you made your son believe his grandfather forgot him." Emily sobbed once, I continued. "I don't know when money became louder than memory for you. I don't know when Brian's voice became stronger than your conscience. But I know this." I held up the forged deed. "This is not family." Then I held up Margaret's letter. "This was family." Brian suddenly stood. "This is insane. He's manipulating everybody. That old woman hated us." The whole courtroom froze. That old woman. He had just called my dead wife that old woman. Judge Ross's eyes lifted slowly. "Mr. Cole," she said, "sit down." Brian did not. She turned him against Emily. She hid everything. That house should have been Emily's. We took care of him. I almost laughed. There it was. The truth rarely arrives gracefully. Usually, it bursts out when entitlement gets tired of wearing manners. Bellamy said nothing. He did not need to. Brian had done his work for him. Judge Ross ordered him to sit. Then she issued a temporary protective order barring Emily and Brian from my property, finances, medical decisions, mail and records. She referred the forged deed, bank application, medication concern, and false welfare report to the sheriff's office and district attorney. She ordered the return of all property taken from my home, including documents, keys, mail, and Margaret's ring. Then she looked at Emily. Ems Cole, you may believe grief made your father vulnerable. Based on what I have seen today, your mistake was assuming vulnerability meant helplessness. Emily cried harder, but I felt no victory in that moment, only exhaustion. Because justice, when it comes against your own child, does not taste sweet. It tastes like medicine. Necessary, bitter, late. After the hearing, Emily approached me in the hallway. The protective order had not been served yet, so she was allowed that close. Brian was with a deputy arguing. Emily looked smaller than she had the night before. Dad, she whispered. I waited. I'm sorry. There are apologies that ask for forgiveness, and there are apologies that ask for consequences to stop. I listened carefully to hear which one hers was. She said, Brian said we were drowning. The credit cards, the business loan, the taxes. He said you didn't need that big house. He said Mom would have wanted me to have it. I felt something cold move through me. Your mother wrote the opposite. Emily wiped her face. I know. You knew? She did not answer. That was the answer. She had seen the letter, or part of it, maybe in the red binder she stole, maybe years before. She knew Margaret feared this, and she continued anyway. Where is her ring? I asked. Emily's face collapsed. Brian pawned it. The hallway tilted for 1 second. I had to put my hand on the wall. He what? He said we could get it back. I looked toward Brian. He was still talking, still angry, still certain the world had wronged him. My wife's ring had been turned into cash by a man who called her that old woman. If Sheriff Harlan had not stepped closer, I do not know what I would have done. Emily whispered, I'll fix it. I looked at her then. My love for you is not gone, I said, but your access to me is. She stared at me as if I had struck her. Maybe boundaries feel like violence to people who benefit from having none. I walked away. 2 weeks later, Brian was arrested. Not in some dramatic movie way, no chase, no sirens screaming. He was taken into custody outside his office after investigators confirmed the forged deed, bank fraud attempt, mail theft, and pawn transaction involving Margaret's ring. Emily was charged later with conspiracy, elder financial exploitation, and filing false statements. Her attorney negotiated differently because she cooperated after Brian blamed everything on her. That part did not surprise me. Men like Brian do not go down with ships. They look for someone smaller to stand on. The pawn shop still had Margaret's ring. That was the miracle. Sheriff Harlan brought it to me in a small evidence envelope after it was released. I sat at my kitchen table and opened it with both hands. The ring looked smaller than I remembered. Isn't that strange? Objects tied to love seem enormous in memory. But in your palm, they are just metal, a thin circle, a promise that outlived the hand it belonged to. I held it for a long time. Then I placed it back in the jewelry box. This time, I locked the box and put it in the safe deposit box with Margaret's letters. Not because I feared Emily would steal it again, because some things deserve more protection after they have survived disrespect. Noah came to see me in April. Mrs. Alvarez drove him because Emily was not allowed near the property without court permission. He stood on the porch, taller than I remembered, holding a backpack. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he hugged me so hard my ribs hurt. I didn't forget you, I said into his hair. He cried then. Teenage boys hate crying, so I pretended not to notice. We made grilled cheese sandwiches because it was the only thing I could cook without insulting Margaret's memory. He told me Brian had been shouting for months. He told me his mother cried at night. He told me he had heard them talk about selling the house, about moving me, about starting over. Then he asked the question I had been afraid of. Is Mom a bad person? I looked out the window at the crooked garden wall. How do you answer that? How do you tell a child the truth without poisoning the roots he still has to grow from? I said, your mom did bad things, serious things, things that hurt people. But you are allowed to love someone and still know they were wrong. He nodded slowly. Do you still love her? I closed my eyes. Yes, then why can't she come here? Because love can open your heart, I said. But it should not open every door. He thought about that. Then he said, Grandma would have liked that. I smiled. She probably would have said it better. The legal process dragged on for months. That is something stories don't always tell you. Justice is not one big courtroom moment. It is forms, meetings, pawn calls, statements, bills, nights when you wake up wondering if you were too harsh, mornings when you remember the lock and know you were not. Emily eventually took a plea that avoided prison but required restitution, probation, counseling, and no unsupervised control over my finances, property, or medical matters ever again. Brian received time. Not enough, some people said. Too much, others said. I stopped measuring justice by how much punishment people got. I measured it by what they could no longer reach. They could no longer reach my house, my accounts, my mail, my medicine, my name. That was enough. For a while, neighbors brought food. Casseroles came like small-town apologies. Mrs. Alvarez brought chicken soup and said Margaret had once given her the same recipe when her husband died. Clara from the recorder's office sent a note that said, "Your wife saved the chain of title better than most attorneys." Attorney Bellamy laughed when I showed him. "She did," he said. "I replaced the front door that summer. Not because the old one was broken, because I could not keep looking at the place where my daughter's voice had told me I didn't live anymore." The new door was solid oak, with a small glass window near the top. I chose a lock myself, a good one. Marv installed it for free. I paid him anyway. Before he left, he said, "Mr. Whitaker, I'll never change a lock again without reading every paper." "Good," I said, "even if they get annoyed." Especially then. On the anniversary of Margaret's death, I opened her letter again. Not the whole thing, just the line, "Love is not the same as trust." I used to think that was a hard sentence. Now I think it is one of the kindest things she ever left me, because love without boundaries becomes a hallway for harm, and trust without truth is just a door with a weak lock. Emily writes to me now actual letters, paper letters. At first, I did not open them. Then one day, I did. The first was full of excuses. The second had fewer. The third said, "I wore Mom's cardigan that night because I wanted the sheriff to think I was the one protecting the family. I know now how sick that was. I am sorry." I read that line 3 times. Then I folded the letter and placed it in a box. Not the walnut box. That one had been returned, scratched but intact, a different box. A box for things I was not ready to forgive, but no longer wanted to carry in my hands. Maybe someday Emily and I will sit across from each other without lawyers, deputies, or locked doors between us. Maybe we won't. I have learned not every broken thing is waiting to be repaired. Some broken things are warnings. Noah still visits. We fixed the crooked garden wall together in October. He wanted to make it straight. I told him no. "Why not?" "Because your grandmother laughed at it crooked." So we repaired the loose stones but kept the uneven line. Some imperfections are not damage. They are proof someone lived there. One evening, after we finished, Noah stood by the porch and looked at the new door. "Grandpa?" "Yes? Do you ever get scared here now?" I thought about lying. Old men lie to children for comfort all the time. But Noah had lived through enough lies. "Yes," I said. "Sometimes." "Then why stay?" I looked at the house, at the windows glowing warm in the evening, at the porch where my daughter locked me out, at the hallway where Margaret hid the key, at the kitchen where grief became evidence, at the walls that had heard betrayal and still held memory. "Because fear doesn't get the deed," I said. He smiled. That sounded like Margaret too. People ask me why I didn't just give Emily the house. They say, "She's your daughter." Yes, she is. She is the baby I rocked at 3 a.m., the teenager who slammed doors, the bride I walked down the aisle, the woman who stood behind my locked door and told me to go away. All of those things are true. But being someone's father does not mean volunteering to be their victim. And being old does not mean your life becomes a waiting room for other people's greed. If there is one thing I want you to remember from my story, it is this. When someone begins calling control concern, start checking the locks. When someone says, "Just sign this," read every line. When a family member tells the world you are confused, make sure your documents are not. And if the people you love ever try to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself, remember this old man standing on his porch at midnight, holding a pharmacy bag, hearing his daughter say he didn't live there anymore. "She changed my locks, but my wife had hidden a key. She stole my papers, but the records still carried my name. She tried to make me look helpless, but the sheriff read the truth out loud. Current owner of record, Harold James Whitaker. At midnight, my daughter changed my locks. By morning, the law read my name." And by the end, I learned something every old heart should know. A locked door can keep you out. But the truth, if you protect it carefully enough, always finds a way back home.